Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today I have an amazing interview with Jasmine Bhullar, aka ThatBronzeGirl. We talked about everything from video games, D&D, RPGs, all of those things, all the way to Twitch streaming, creator journey and all that. It was an amazing conversation. And before we head into the interview, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to help me spread to more geeks like me, and I hope you enjoy. Let's start with first of all, you've been on Twitch every day. You've been doing campaigns on D&D. You are a prolific creator, and I want to take you, yeah, I want to take you to the beginning to the beginning on Twitch. How did you start becoming a Twitch streamer? Where did that come from in your life?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think like I never approached Twitch thinking it was gonna become my job. I never thought, oh, this is something I'm gonna make money from. I was working full time at the time. Uh, I was not an affiliate. There was no way to subscribe. At that time, I didn't even have like a PayPal, Patreon, nothing. And I was
Oh,
just
wow.
doing it for free, for fun because I felt like there just wasn't a lot of creators that looked like me in the space making the kind of content that I was interested in. I didn't really have anything to start. My computer wasn't really good enough to play AAA games. And so I played retro games. I started out with like PlayStation 1 games because at that time I worked at a retro game store. And so I had access to like PlayStation 2, PlayStation 1 games, and a lot of them I hadn't played because when they came out I lived in India. So that was kind of the appeal, is like, do you want to watch someone play Final Fantasy 7 for the first time? And that was the entire theme of my channel, was just like playing through these classics for the first time ever with an audience. And I fell in love, I found myself streaming until 2, 3 a.m. in the morning after work just because I enjoyed sitting there playing like Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty with an audience. I loved it.
That's awesome. The fact that you're a video gamer, this is so relatable to me. Uh, I'm an avid fan of everything like role-playing games, less of shooters, but
Mhm.
I can take hours sitting on Mass Effect or Dragon Age or all of those, yeah, all of those heavy story games. So these are like the games that I like to play. And I think that the connection between storytelling and video games is really apparent in your journey too. So we will talk about storytelling later, but I did want to ask, um, are there now in your place in your journey, what are the type of games you like to play? What are the types of games that you would play on your Twitch channel?
Mhm. It really varies. I feel like my favorite is still I recently, like, my favorite game I played through last year was Resident Evil Village, which is so funny because when I first started on Twitch, I refused to play scary games and I had never played a scary game in my life ever. And then I started as like a challenge, and I love story-driven games. So like Resident Evil Village, Ghost of Tsushima, those were like my favorite games I streamed last year. I love playing games on the hardest difficulty as well. I loved Hades, I loved Bloodborne, I love the Dark Souls series. Right now, I've been playing a lot of Monster Hunter Rise. And funnily enough, Monster Hunter is probably one of my biggest inspirations in general because I feel like if you want to look at creatures and fauna that are stimulating and interesting, that take a lot of inspiration from our world, Capcom does it the best with Monster Hunter. Like, it's so perfect and like kind of thinking about what makes a normal animal menacing, like what makes it scary. So I love the takes they have on like a normal bear, but this one's armored and has giant claws and things like that. Like, I love Monster Hunter. I'm a super fan of the Yakuza games. And you mentioned Mass Effect, and I love Mass Effect. And from there, I like stumbled onto Sleeping Dogs. And from there, I discovered Ryuga Gotoku Studios and the Yakuza games. I've I don't think I can go back to Grand Theft Auto because I just feel like that game has everything. It has drama, like a soap opera, it has action, it has great fighting mechanics, and it has this like open world you can run around in. So I love that game and I'll probably be playing whatever they put out this next year.
Open world games are like the best, right? Because they have
Yeah.
like the ability to just you can just go around and do whatever. Um,
I do
yeah,
get
so
overwhelmed if the
yeah.
map is too big. You know,
Yeah, so
like The Witcher
that was
3.
my problem. That was my problem with Skyrim. When I played when I played Skyrim, I was like, okay, there's so many things to do, and there are markers for literally everything on the map. This is too much. I need progression. I need to know what I'm doing next.
Mhm. Yeah, I've never beaten Skyrim. But
Yeah.
it's because I get so distracted. So I've played over I think 250 hours of Skyrim. I've never beaten that game. And every time I go back and say, I'm going to beat this game, I start a new save file. No, I get distracted and I'm a member of the Assassins Guild and the Thieves Guild and the Warriors Guild and I've traveled to and I've killed vampires and stuff. There's still no one's dealt with the Stormcloaks or Ulfric or whatever his name is. He's still there. I'm never going to be able to resolve the civil war happening in Skyrim because I got distracted somewhere along the way.
Same. It's so funny because like these kinds of games, they give you too much freedom. But yeah, other games like they need to put you on a leash. That's why The Witcher 3 worked so well for me because you always knew what you were doing. And in order to open up stuff, you can go wherever you want. But there were like things that you needed to do in order to get to certain stages in the story. So that was like one of the things I really liked. But segueing into storytelling, I think many people who will watch this, maybe their first introduction to you was Battle for Beyond. Um, other people could see you from The Masquerade, Seattle by Night.
Yeah.
I haven't watched it yet, but I plan to. And also, I started watching Shikar. I hope I'm pronouncing it
How do
right.
you like it?
It's like I have like because I'm working full time, I can't like watch all the episodes.
Mhm.
But I did start like I did watch the first full episode and then started watching the second,
Mhm.
and I found myself putting it in the background like a podcast when I'm
Yeah.
coding. So it's so funny, and Battle for Beyond was so good too. Can you
Yeah.
walk me through like your storytelling technique? Like, how do you begin to envision a world?
Mhm. It depends on the production. So I usually have at any given time like a number of ideas of things I want to run going in my head always. And some of them are better suited for a really long run. Like I've heard from a lot of people like Shikar is their comfort show. They put it on in the background while they're doing other things and that's intentionally so because it's an ongoing campaign. So the idea is that it's supposed to feel cozy. It's supposed to feel like a warm sweater and the pacing is adjusted so that it's interesting things happen, but if you miss an episode or if you're not paying the most attention, at most you're missing a couple of jokes, you know, like it's not going to be something that the pace is moving so rapidly. It's not Squid Game, you know, like it. So the first thing I look at is what exactly am I making? Is it something that is short term? Is it something that needs to run for 8 episodes, 3 episodes? Is it a one shot? Or is it something that I plan to run long term? And that begins to dictate like which of the concepts I want to kind of bring that's floating around in my brain like out into like the pen and paper. um and from there I start thinking about who I know is going to be a part of the table and where I think they're going to shine. And I will say that with Battle for Beyond, I had me and Joe worked very closely on the casting. So even though I didn't know who all the players were as I was writing the campaign, like I started development before we had cast locked in, I knew enough to know that it was people with comedy chops. And that means that I can introduce almost a little bit more darkness and a little bit more seriousness and despair because the players will naturally lighten it. Whereas if you go in with something very ridiculous, a ridiculous concept, and then you add ridiculous players, very quickly it becomes something that just doesn't have any story or direction. Um, but if you take a very serious or dark concept and then you put in players that are very funny, they bring it right to where it should be, you know? So that's kind of the first things I do.
Awesome. And I think like there were like in Battle for Beyond, for example, there were a lot of moments, a lot of funny moments that feel like they happened organically. And I feel like that's like the give and take that happens on the table between a DM and their players. But can you like a lot of it feels like improv. So do you have like experience with improv? Like, have you ever done improv?
Um, okay, so I'm not from LA like all the rest of the cast was. So I didn't come up in what is it, Upright Citizens Brigade and all of these
Yeah,
like
UCB.
theater groups. Yeah, like I didn't do any of that. I went to school in India and then moved here. So my main improv experience came from Model United Nations, which is basically debate, but you role play being diplomats of different nations. So I very much come from the writing world because I did do theater, I did stage. Me and my brother would like write. I would write and he would direct our school play. So we were big nerds. We were like the Wachowskis were like our heroes growing up. Is like we had decided that we were going to be like the Wachowskis and we were going to make our own Matrix, you know? And so I never came into it thinking that I would be on camera talent. I always came into this thinking I would be a writer and a narrative designer. So I think in that way I was kind of cut out for this, and I think that's what makes me different from a lot of DMs is I'm not an improv performer. I'm a writer at heart, and I think that that shows like in how my campaigns are. That being said, Battle for Beyond was not scripted. And so I think that where the funny jokes and that those great like spontaneous moments come from is from actually my hosting background. Um so I actually wanted really badly wanted Iffy to be on the cast because Iffy and I hosted the pre-show for E3 together. And with hosting, there is this very, you have to like really vibe with someone and have good chemistry with them because everything's happening live. And you have certain beats you have to hit, but you'll always hear in your comms like, "Hey, we need you to stretch for 3 minutes." And you just have to banter. And 3 minutes doesn't seem like a long time, but it's so long when you're like, okay, this segment is running late, so we just have to talk for 3 minutes. How's it going, Iffy? So I knew that like if he's there, like we will have the chemistry, and I bring that same kind of energy to playing at a D&D table. I feel like if we trust each other and if we can look at each other and kind of understand, are we making this funny or are we making this sad? Then those moments will naturally happen. Um, and yeah, I think I was trained to do that from like the video game and Twitch side of things, whereas like a lot of the tabletop people in LA learned that from improv theater.
That's awesome. And also like your comment about being a writer at heart. Yeah, I fully feel that. And yeah, this is like writing. I've been writing on the internet, and this is like I fully understand where you're coming from. And yeah, like not being like the person that is cut out for the camera, but more for the writing room. This is something I very much relate to,
Yeah,
and yeah.
yeah. I mean, Into the Motherlands, it was really funny because I did an adventuring academy with Brennan before I ever had him in my game. That was my first introduction to him. And he was talking about Into the Motherlands. And he said, "Oh yeah, and Into the Motherlands is amazing, and it made me want to run sci-fi." And I started laughing, and I was like, "I wrote that season." And he was like, "What?" And I was like, "Yeah, I wasn't in it, but like I wrote the entire first season was written by me." And he was like, I had no clue. I was like, "Yeah, I'm a writer." It was really funny because I think he thought I just DM'd, and I was like, "No, I write other people's campaigns all the time." Like, I feel
Wow,
like,
that's awesome.
who is it? Sia. You know how Sia like started writing other artists' songs and then she started singing? I feel like in some ways I'm kind of like that, where I started like writing things, but it kind of happened in reverse order because now I write and I DM, and I started out DMing, but in my heart, like the writing came first.
Awesome. Also, like all the D&D campaigns, all the shows, how would you say like you got into that as a beginner creator back in the day? How would those opportunities present themselves, and how you would take advantage of them?
Yeah, for me it happened like it's hard to like I'm glad you're asking me how I did it as opposed to what advice I would give, because giving advice in this regard is difficult for me because I don't think that the path I took is easily replicated. Because my start in tabletop RPG happened from comic books and video games. So like in my case is a bit unique in the streaming space because a lot of the people I work with are not full-time Twitch streamers. But like I started playing video games and talking about comic books. I had a comic book show, and at that time there was a studio local in Seattle that hired me to come host their comic book show. So I co-hosted that with Zach, and we did this comic book show. um and from there they asked me to sit in and as a guest spot because they also ran tabletop RPGs on that channel. They asked me to sit in as a guest, knowing that I played D&D like kind of for fun on my channel. And I guess they just liked me so much that I got I started getting gigs, and the thing is I was always interested in DMing, as much as I was interested in being a player. And it really used to bother me that there were no female DMs, but then all of the women I played with, like so many of them, so many people in general, not just women, are afraid to DM. And I never had that. I was just like, I don't care if I look like an idiot. Like I'll do, like I'll do it. Like, because it always bothered me when I would see like, oh yeah, we're doing an all women's production, but then the DM was a guy. And I'd be like, why didn't you get a female DM? They're like, we couldn't find anybody. So that I kind of came into it with that energy of like, I mean, I know the rules, I'm a player, why can't I DM? But once again, I had the writing chops, so I think for me this was always going to be the natural progression.
Awesome. Um, yeah, I mean, like the fact that so many people are like yeah, afraid to DM, that's like, and you stepping up, that's like feeling so right in some way, because yeah, because the your style of DMing, like I need to see more of Shikar, but from based on my viewing of Battle for Beyond, you have so much like fun energy, and it's yeah, and it's like I was like this.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
like
I
my
mean,
first stuff wasn't great. Like my first campaigns were not amazing, but I think like you have to approach this with that vibe of like you should just do it. And I think everyone is so focused on trying to be on the biggest stage, right? Like everyone is like wants to be on the biggest shows, wants to have the most viewers, but I liked that the shows I started on were so small because it allowed me to really experiment and like kind of figure out what I'm doing. And I still don't know all the rules, but I will say that like my screen presence and my DMing is a lot better than it used to be. And I'm really happy those shows didn't have a lot of views because they weren't very good, you know?
Okay. Um, I do want to take you to some questions that I have here. When you DM campaign, do you find yourself, how do you deal like with curveballs and like surprises that the players throw at you?
Um, I'm trying to think. I usually don't have any set expectation of what the players are going to do. I just assume that they're going to do something crazy. And that kind of, I think,
Yeah.
helps inform how I plan things. A lot of times, like one of the feedbacks I got from Battle for Beyond is that, and Abria said this. She said it felt like you dropped us in a fully formed world. And in my head, I was like, yes, I kind of did, because that way, if you run off or if you do something that's completely off the wall, I have an answer for that most likely, because instead of establishing the names of everything and what everything looks like, what I establish first is the logic and feel of a setting. Is this realistic? Is this magical? Is this rooted in fantasy and make believe? Is this rooted in like what emotion am I trying to evocate here? And then that kind of dictates how the world will respond. So maybe I don't anticipate that my players are going to burn down the inn and kill the quest giver, but I do establish emotionally, like, well, in some games that might be funny. In other games, this might be like you see his grieving family by the side of the road, weeping, holding his ashes in their arms. Like that, it does inform like what direction I want to take it. And so I think that's the first, like, you don't have to have a nice, clean answer to everything your players do. I think you just have to know, like, how does the world in general react to tragedy or to violence or to the just something that's completely, unexpected. As for did my players ever surprise me? Yes. Brennan trying to have sex with a deity did surprise me. I because the character had shown so much growth that for him to try the same thing he tried in episode 2, all these episodes later, I was like, you're gonna try this again? Because we had already seen that move where he's like, you're a big eyebrow daddy and let me know if, and then to see him pull that out all these episodes later when he's shown all this growth, I was like, you've changed, but you haven't changed. You're the same, you know?
Yeah, that moment was so funny. I was like, oh my God, Brennan, no.
It was so good though, because I think it reminded us like, yeah, he's grown a lot, but he's still he's Nick Hill is Nick Hill and he's not going to
Yeah.
change, Like he will grow, but he's not going to be a completely different person.
Yeah, that's so funny. There's something like about your world building that really interests me. It looks to me like a lot of Battle for Beyond is drawing like inspiration from Indian culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to ask you if that's something that you intentionally do, or if that's something that you just naturally do when
It's a
you
little
create a
bit of
world.
both. It's a little bit of both. I think I naturally kind of go that way, and with Battle for Beyond, it was very intentional. Um, I think for the longest time I shied away from it, if I'm being honest, because I was afraid of being typecast, which is something that happens in this industry a lot. There's not a lot of Desi people like in this space. There's not a lot of Indian, Pakistani women like that are in this space. And so I think I was afraid for the longest time that if I wrote this stuff in, like people are going to think, oh, she can only do one thing. So like my first major production, I would say, was actually a show called Starter Kit for Geek and Sundry. And I wrote and GM'd a Vampire the Masquerade series. And I was very excited for that to be my introduction to like this big audience, because I felt like I needed that. Like I needed to let people know that I can do horror, I can do Cthulhu. I love Eldritch stuff, and you see a lot of Eldritch influence in Battle for Beyond too. Because my what has always interested me is like while while all of these Lovecraft stories were set in on the American East Coast, like what would have happened if, Innsmouth like creatures were in New Delhi or in Goa or in like Singapore, like those concepts like interest me, like what would happen. And so I think some of that like question I tried to answer in Battle for Beyond.
That's so good because I think you doing it is presenting like a very unique voice that I, as a viewer, haven't seen in anywhere else, basically. And like, it's not a typecast thing because for me, I am like I my introduction to Indian culture is very limited
Mhm.
as I am like in the Middle East. I am not in any way, shape, or form seeing anything related to Indian culture in my day to day.
Mhm.
And like doing that and like not shying away from the risk of being typecast is like doing something unique because not a lot of people have that.
Yeah.
So thank you for doing it because that's
Ah,
amazing. And yeah, it's like it presented a new kind of storytelling world like that for me was very interesting. Okay, so you talked about Lovecraft,
mhm.
and I'm really interested because that's like segueing into books, fantasy, science fiction. What are your inspirations?
Oh, wow, so many. When it comes to science fiction, I love Foundation, Isaac Asimov. It's my favorite. I'm a big fan. I love the Alien comic books, and I own a lot of them. I've read so many of the different Alien runs that come out. I think they've come out with like Dark Horse and now with Marvel. I love all of them. Alien is probably one of my favorite franchises ever across video games, like film, everything. I'm obsessed with it. Um, Lord of the Rings, but I feel like everybody says that. A little bit more niche is probably I love Stephen Bruce, so I love the Vlad Taltos books, and um, I love the Lies of Locke Lamora. And yeah, it kind of spreads across a lot of different things, but I really love comic books, and I'm a big comic book nerd. And so a lot of my other influences, especially like talking about Lovecraft and the Eldritch, like comes from Doctor Strange, because I've read like so many Doctor Strange comics dating back all the way to like the 70s. And even though those were a little bit steeped in Orientalism, I took the good things out of it, and I sometimes carry that forward in my storytelling because I just love wizards.
That's awesome. Wow, so many book recommendations and comics, and that's
Yeah,
amazing.
kind of all over the place, honestly. Oh my gosh, because I even love like I could talk about comics all day, but like I love Saga and Fable and Sandman. And Sandman I would say is big a big like touchstone that I feel like comes into like a lot of other things because I'm a big Neil Gaiman fan. So
Yeah, that's so good. For me, like there wasn't uh, as a kid, as a teenager, there wasn't like a lot of comic book stores here in Tel Aviv,
mhm.
but there was one, and it had like lots of stuff. And I remember seeing like Shonen Jump, which is Japanese.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, and I was like, I would buy them every month. I would order them like at the store. I would say, yeah, I want to pre-order the next issue that comes out.
Mhm.
And they would have like promotional Yu-Gi-Oh cards and like Dragon Ball Z, like all of these things that I didn't have from my environment. And
Yeah.
then like yeah, that's so you choosing like those specific inspirations, it shows like such a variety, and that's so good.
Yeah,
Um,
I kind of came into tabletop backwards. A lot of people I know started playing D&D when they were young, but much like you, my experience is different because I grew up in Patiala, Punjab. So like I moved there when I was like 9 or 10 and I lived there for 12 years. And so it was one of those things where so like the reason I started reading comics was because even though I knew how to speak Punjabi and I was learning Hindi because we did not speak Hindi in my household growing up in California, I all of a sudden, because I was in the school system, had to learn Hindi and Punjabi, and I had to learn to read and write them. And it's two different alphabets. And
oh
so
wow.
that was challenging because just because I know how to speak it does not mean I know how to write it, you know? And so I forgot how it happened. My dad started getting me Hindi comics because I was just having
Oh.
trouble finding things that I wanted to read. So he would bring me stacks of Hindi comics and they were all knockoffs of America of like Marvel and DC comics. So we had like our own version of the Punisher, but his name was Doga and he wore a dog mask and it was the funniest thing ever. I thought these things were hilarious. I would read them all day, and that's how I learned Hindi. And then when I came to America and I was older, I just continued the habit, but then I was like, "Oh, these comics are much better." These are a lot better than what I was reading. So then I just got hooked, but the habit was like already there, you know?
Yeah, that's so good. Like, also the point you're making there about like learning from comics. That's so good because a lot of people are learning new stuff using storytelling, and that's something that is really important. So that's a good point. Okay, someone wants to know if you can pitch your perfect video game.
See, there's a couple that I have, but I'm afraid to talk about them because I want to make them someday. Um,
Oh, okay.
but I think I'm trying to think on like one that I really would love to make or I would really love to have to play my hand at. I would love to make something in the Netrunner slash cyberpunk genre. Um, but I would want it to be set in like Pakistan or something like that. I think that would be very interesting because we haven't seen something like that set there. And I would like for like the base mechanics to feel a lot like BioShock because that's like one of my favorite games. So when I first played the first BioShock, they had like all of these kind of puzzles and like pipe things you had to solve to like open doors and like hack things. I love the idea of playing like a neon ninja that has to like hack through different things and infiltrate stuff and kind of extract. And so it would kind of be an inspiration or a cross between Cyberpunk and another game I love called Deep Rock Galactic. Deep Rock Galactic is a game where you play a mining company of dwarves and you can play with your friends, it's co-op, and you take on different contracts. And the contract will be something like go to this place, retrieve this mineral, and then extract before you're overrun by aliens. And so I like that formula. I like that like you choose your loadout, deploy, go do the job and come back, you know? And sometimes you don't come back. Like sometimes you sometimes you don't make it. Sometimes somebody gets left behind. Um and I thought like that with like a idea of like loading, like choosing your loadout, choosing your tools, taking on a contract, invading a corporation, hacking something or stealing information or doing something, sabotaging them in some way, and then extracting and getting rewards based off of how successful you are would be like an amazing game. Like I would play that video game and I would love to like make that video game.
Okay. Developers, you can reach out to Jasmine. Let's make it happen, please.
Hit me up on Twitter. I have a Gmail.
Yeah, that's amazing. Also, like the dystopian world that you are like setting this into, um, that's like I love that you had it like off the top of your head.
Yeah, sometimes my brain's like that. You know,
um,
if I can never make it as a
yeah.
video game, I could probably run that as a Blades in the Dark miniseries.
Oh, that's great. I mean, like there is something I really like about the storytelling of video games as opposed to like doing stuff at the table, that you are able to have lots of things happening at once because you don't have to explain that verbally.
Yeah.
And yeah, and also like um, doing a video game is a lot of work. And as an engineer, like I was privy to a lot of that work when I briefly worked at a video game company.
Mhm.
So, but I mean, like nowadays, people make it so easy. Like they would give you like, here's, give me your idea. Here's what's going to happen. We will do all the work, and you just need to approve the stages. Like it's like being an investor, that you have like there are a lot of companies now who would make you um, a mobile video game or
Mhm.
something like that from a template, which is crazy. Like you can
Yeah.
like you can just create your game in like 1 month of work. Like that's what's happening today. People make it so easy.
Oh my God.
um yeah, so my point is you could actually make your game a lot. Probably it's probably easier than you think.
Right? I mean, I would definitely it's funny because like people will come into my Twitch stream and they just want to talk about D&D and it's funny because like I chatting with you via email, I think I even said or you mentioned that like, oh, you're a gamer. I'm like, yeah, I'm a gamer first. And so it's kind of funny when people just want to talk about D&D and I'm like, if it's a choice between playing D&D and playing video games, I would probably choose video games if I had to choose one. And that answer shocks people. They're just like, "What?" And I'm like, if I had to give up one, D&D or video games, I don't even think I would think about it. Like I think I would just say or I would say get rid of the D&D and give me the video games because that's just a I don't know. I think I started playing that first and I'm just more attached to it and I feel like so like you were saying there's a lot of things that can happen at once and that, that's kind of like, what makes it a different storytelling medium. And I completely agree because for me that manifests in the form of like music and like the sense you get like playing a game, it feels like you are at the center of the universe because you are the only character. There's no other player characters at the table. Like I love D&D and video games for opposite reasons. D&D is collaborative, but video games like you are the character you're playing is like everything's happening around them and you feel invested in them. So I cry when I play video games all the time. And you're talking about Mass Effect and like I will never forget how much I cried at certain scenes with Morden Solis. But that when he says like I
I
would have
have
liked to have
goosebumps.
run tests on seashells, like I wept. Like I felt because at that by that point, like I was just and it was everything. It was all of the missions culminating up in that moment. It was the music. It was me being Commander Shepard and being responsible for him. He's like a member of my crew, and yet I'm allowing him to do this thing. Like there was there was so much there that was like painful but also cathartic. And I'm not saying that can never happen in D&D games, but it's a lot harder because of the type of medium video games are, you know? It's you're just so it's like I said, it's an attack on your senses. You have like this visual component, you have this auditory component, and then you have the struggle of the missions you completed to get to that point, you know? It almost feels
Yes.
like the hobbits in the Lord of the Rings. One of the my favorite moments is at the end of that trilogy when, King Aragorn says, "My friends, you bow to no one," and all of them bow down, because it feels like this entire journey they've been on, like this is the moment where it settles in, like these four halflings did that, They dealt with death, betrayal, the elements, hunger, exhaustion, and they got here. And that it all rests on the pin of that moment. And it's so hard to do that in TVs and TV shows and movies, but it happens once in a while. But in video games, it happens all the time. Cause like you are the person that has to struggle to beat a boss. And then when you beat them and there's a beautiful cutscene at the end, that gameplay adds to it, where it just adds this gravity that wouldn't otherwise be there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I fully agree. This, like, video games can have so much emotional weight packed behind like small tidbits of like small tidbits of information that the game throws at you. And yeah, I feel like video games, I like that you said that if you would have to choose between the two, you would choose video games between D&D and video games. Because I feel that too. I also like to write fantasy. Brandon Sanderson is my favorite author. I said it all like already, I think one time in an interview. But I would always go back to the place of video games, like going into The Witcher 3 and doing like, I remember I was so obsessed. It's so funny given what we're talking about, but I was so obsessed in reading books in The Witcher 1, because in The Witcher 1, certain things couldn't be done unless you read a book about it. And yeah, and I was like, that game mechanic is so mind-blowing. I would have to run to every bookstore owner in the city to buy some books, because that would open up secret dialogue choices when I'm dissecting a person's brain.
Yeah. I think like The Witcher is such a great example too of having read the Witcher books. I think the games are better. And that's kind of mind-boggling to me. But, watching the show reminded me of that, where I was like, oh, this character is so much better in the game. And then I was like, oh, this character wasn't very good in the book. But like in the video games, they do such a better job of like making Triss a reasonable like rival to Yennefer. And I don't think the books, it's like, it feels like that character wasn't as fleshed out. So sometimes I feel like, and it's just because it's a different medium, right? Like you have all this little nuance just in how characters are animated and mocapped. Like the way they move and stuff like that tells you so much about who they are, or differences in like how their hair is styled or their fashion or the way they talk, like kind of informs your reaction to them more so than on the written page, So it's a very different medium, and I like it for that reason. I think like one of the games I always narratively like just absolutely adore is Alan Wake. And it's just it's because like it once again plays with that idea of like, I don't know what's real, in this game. And it's so hard to imagine that in any other medium. It's so hard to imagine that as like something else, because he's this writer and these things are happening and you can't tell if it's a dream or it's not because of the way the game is made. I just love it. I like to control for that reason too.
I have Alan Wake in my Steam Steam library, and I think I only ever played it in like for 10 minutes, and then I left it because I was in the middle of playing something else. But now I will try to replay it.
Do it. It's one of my favorite games. It has a great soundtrack too.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm coming into it like completely completely new. So yeah, that would be amazing.
I'll have a good time with that.
Yeah. Have you ever played Detroit Become Human?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That game also is very relatable to what you said about like the senses thing, like the game overwhelms your senses,
Mm-hmm.
because it's so funny to me to play in a game that has such a human component, but the
Mm-hmm.
game like put it in front of you like these are not humans, these are machines.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
uh, and that
So
kind of
when you
storytelling,
include
like
like the because I mean this is something that comes up in D&D, like trying to get people to remember a sense of urgency. I love games with quick time events. Like so one of my favorite games in the vein of Detroit Become Human is the Dark Picture anthology games, which are like a bunch of horror games made by the same people that made Until Dawn. But you have to make split-second decisions. Like there's a timer and it's like
yeah.
rapidly getting smaller and it's like, do you go left or do you go right? And it's like, I don't do anything. Something horrible happens. And I love that in those style of games, because it's so hard to like have that sense of urgency when you're playing D&D. Like no matter how many times you tell your players like, "Oh, you can only really say a couple words. You're in the middle of combat." They're still going to sit there and be like, "I don't know what I want to do right now." But in those video games you have no choice. It's like, "Nope, that bar is getting smaller. What are you going to do?" So
Yeah,
I like that.
that's amazing. um okay, I think before we wrap this up, first of all, this has been such a joy. There's so much year left in 2022, and I'm so excited for what you're going to do. And I was wondering if you want to tease something.
Oh yeah, I hadn't even thought about that. Shakar is coming back in 2022. We have some new sponsors. We have a new cast member. So make sure you check us out on YouTube. You can catch up with the old episodes. Keep an eye on my Twitter over the next couple of weeks. Me, Xander, Gabe, and Valvin are super excited to announce who's joining us as well as our air date. So super excited to continue on with that project. I am doing a lot of writing this year. The one I can talk about is Into the Motherlands. Keep an eye out for that source book. My name is going to be in it, but there are other NDA things I'm writing on. So if you like my writing and you would like to bring it to your own table, make sure you keep an eye once again on my Twitter and Instagram, where you can see some of the stuff I'm working on. I also have a couple of shows in the works. So if you liked Battle for Beyond, maybe there's a little something for you coming down the pipeline.
I'm so excited. That sounds so good. Um, yeah, and that's wonderful. I can't wait for it. Um, I did want to close this with a little something for beginner creators. I know I don't want to ask you what's your advice for people, because as you said, your journey is different. But I do want to focus on the Twitch part instead of like the storytelling part. Like if you were starting over with your Twitch channel, what would you do to grow it today?
Um, that's interesting. So I think if I was starting today, I wouldn't honestly change much, because I think what has kept me kind of doing it longer than a lot of my friends who quit a year or two into it is I never came into it with the idea of growth. I came into it in the idea of what content do I think is good and what brings me joy in making it. And then figuring out the third part, which is, okay, well, how do I continue making that? Does that mean I take a day job? Does that mean I advertise this on Twitter? I will say the number one thing I wish I had changed is the first 2 years I was on Twitch, or I think, yeah, the first 2 or 3 years I was on Twitch, I didn't even have an Instagram or a Twitter. So even if people wanted to find me, there was no way they could find me. And I kind of learned the hard way that when you go live, sometimes your own followers don't get a notification that you're going live. So you kind of need to use social media. And as someone who's an introvert and hates social media, I think that's the one thing I would probably change is get a social media. People need to know they like you, they want to watch, they need to know when and how and where they can watch and what you're doing, and they can't do that if you don't have any social media. Bronze, you need to do that. So there are people that would come into my channel and be like, "You still stream?" Like I never stopped. It was because I did not have I had no social media. And I think that's really important.
I think like it's also important to note like I remember some time ago, like when we planned this interview, I went to check out your Twitch channel, and I was like, it was morning for me. It was like 8 or 9 here in Israel, and I remember seeing you live, and I was like, wait, isn't it like 1 a.m. there or something like that?
Sometimes I do stream at the demon hours. I'm not gonna lie. It's if it's a good game, you know, when I get that when I hit a game that I'm like addicted to, I find myself streaming for 12 hours at a time.
It was that game. I can tell you exactly what game it was. It was a game where you were playing with someone, and there was a car and zombies.
Oh,
And
Project Zomboid. Yes.
yeah.
I was addicted to that game. I was addicted to that game. I was like, how am I going to survive the zombie apocalypse? And it was me and my friend Balvin. Balvin's on Shakar with me. We play D&D together. And we were trying to get this car started, and these zombies started coming in, and it was yeah, we played that. We played that game a lot.
Yeah, that sounds like a fun game.
It's really fun, but it's really hard.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. I remember like I came in the stream like as I was preparing for work, and I was like watching, and you were so frustrated because you couldn't find a place to sleep.
Yeah, you have to find a safe place to rest. Otherwise, your character gets tired, and then you can't run from the zombies. It's really serious, Oren. So I was like, where am I going to sleep? I need to find some. Yeah, I remember that, actually. I was stressed because I lost so many characters in that game. I was like, not this one. I can't lose another character.
Oh, wow. Well, Jasmine, thank you so much for this conversation. It was a pleasure to talk to you. And I hope we can do that sometime again during 2022, because I know you will have some new stuff to talk about. You're a very prolific writer. You're a very active Twitch streamer, and like you create stuff all the time. I'm very excited to follow your creator journey into 2022. And thank you so much.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun.